Hello, hello. It's topic 11, keyworded business communication. And so in this topic, we cover some things that we didn't cover last time in business correspondence. If you recall, we didn't talk about reports, tables, and things like that. And that's because we're going to cover them in this particular topic. We're talking about business documents that are being prepared that usually require the help of a computerized system to make it easier and to put things together. So let's get started. Of course, welcome to the virtual space. Let's work together to learn, share ideas, participate, and learn something new. The wise always seeks knowledge. When we talk about business, keyboarded business communication, some documents just need to be typed. For this reason, it's important to know how they should be typed. It's very, very, very important. We have important margins such as letters, which we should know have a top margin of 2 inches and a bottom left and right margin usually of 1 inch. And so these letters, normally the margin is the space at the very top of the page, on the bottom of the page, and the left of the page, and right of the page, that when you open up a Microsoft Word document, it doesn't allow you to type in those sections. And so normally we start them off. The top margin just means that that's where we start typing when we look at the top of a page. So the top margin being 2 inches probably means that this typing is going to start like right here compared to like right here, which is normally what happens. And so when you set a margin in Microsoft Word, it affects the entire document and affects the page. And so sometimes I've seen instances where they ask questions about margins in particular documents. Most importantly, I've seen questions related to letters, knowing that letters should have a top margin of 2 inches and bottom left and right of 1 inch. Of course, is on the first page. On the second page of a letter, it should be 1 inch all around. So 1 inch top, bottom, left, and right. When we talk about other important margins, we could talk about reports. And when it comes to reports, reports can be either left bound, unbound, or right bound. When we talk about binding, we talk about those books that normally have the spirals on the side. That's called binding. And so depending on where the binding is, you have to set your margins differently. If it's an unbound report, that means that there's no binding at all. And so we don't have to worry about changing the left or right side of the sheet of paper, because nothing is going to get cut off, because we're probably just putting a paper clip or stapling the pages together. Versus if we have binding on the left side, so if we have any binding on the left side, so any spirals on the left side of this page, what needs to happen is we need to give some extra space so that when we put those spirals in, they don't cut off any of the words. And so when we have a report that is left bound, that usually means that the left side is going to be greater than the right side. And so the left side is going to be 0.5 inches greater than the right side in a left bound report. And the opposite happens in a right bound report. When it's right bound, the left side is shorter than the right side. So the left side will be 1 inch and the right side will be 1.5 inches. No matter the type of report, the bottom is usually 1 inch and the top is usually 2 inches on the front page. Just like with a letter, the first page is 2 inches. The second page would be, normally would be a top of 1 inch. And that's important to know. I've seen questions that ask you to give the margins for these particular report styles. When we're talking about reports, because that's a big thing in this section, we need to be familiar with the parts of a report. And these come up a lot in multiple choice questions as well as short answer questions. Parts of a report. When it comes to reports, business reports, every business report usually has a title page, and that's just a page that's given an idea of who prepared the report, who was the report for, when was the report prepared, what's the title of the report. Just like a cover page on a document, it provides a title and a cover on a report. Sometimes you have a summary, they call it an executive summary, where you just summarize the overall information discussed in the report. Because of course, a report is going to be multiple pages, unlike a letter, which is maybe 1 or 2 pages, a memo, which is most times 1 page. A report is going to be multiple pages. And so a summary page just gives an idea of what the entire report is about itself. We have a table of contents, which just tells us, okay, what sections are in this report and what page can I find it on. So similar to a table of content in a book, where chapter 1 is on page 12, chapter 2, they say is on page 50. The same happens in a report. They have to give the main sections or main headings of a report, and then normally you put the page number, all right? Then of course the body is where you give the full detail of the report itself, all of your findings, the report itself. The reference or bibliography or works cited page is a page that we focus on because I've seen them ask a question about preparing references. And so it's a page that lists all of the places that you got information from in order to prepare that report. And so that can include websites, books, newspapers, articles. All of those are going to be listed on your reference page, letting the reader of the report know where you got some of your information from. And then the appendix is the section where we normally include things like photos and information that you can use, that's used or talked about throughout in the body of the report. This is a perfect example of a reference page. On this reference page, you'll see that it starts off with the word references, and then what's listed below is going to be a list of every single source or external or book or reference or document that was used to help prepare the report itself. And so what you're going to find is that normally reference pages look this way. The entire report itself is supposed to be double spaced. And so on a reference page, it can either be double spaced or single spaced. But what happens is double space just means that there's extra space in between each line. It looks like you press enter twice, but it naturally does that. And so on the reference page, what happens is you list all of the places you got the information from, starting with the author's name, then normally the date, then normally the name of the article or the name of the document, and then you say where it comes from, what page it comes from, and where you got that information from. So right now, these two references here are both from websites, but you can also have information from like a newspaper or from a book. Let's say it was from The Guardian, then you would have the name of the article here, who wrote the article, what day the article was published, and then you want to put Nassau Guardian, page, whatever. And that just gives an idea, because the reference page should allow the reader of your report to know exactly where you got the information from, to go back and see what it is. In the references department, I can tell that these are two different references because of the way that the document is written as well. This is called a hanging indent. A hanging indent is when the top line is on the margin, the bottom line is indented a little bit or pushed over to the right, away from the left margin. And so that's how your reference page should look. Your top line starting on the left margin, any line underneath is indented just a little bit. And it's clear where one reference starts and ends and where another begins. Okay, as you notice as well, we start off with the last name of the writer, comma, and then their first initial, and then we put the date. So we don't put the full name of the author. And then what you're going to do as well is you're going to organize the reference page in alphabetical order based on last name as well. Okay, so it's a good example of a reference page. When we talk about reports themselves, oftentimes reports start off with a draft. And this is a perfect example of how a keyboarded document draft looks. There's a lot of space in between to allow persons to add these proofreading marks, make circles, make corrections, ask persons to do different things. In this instance, they probably only use half of a proofreading mark, but as you get familiar with the proofreading marks, you'll see that on the BGCSE, they do use a lot of them when they do something like this. But this is considered to be a draft. We spoke about it last time in business correspondence, but this is considered to be a rough draft, which is just a draft prepared with sufficient space for suggestions, corrections, and changes. So your first writing of the particular report or the document is in draft form, and then somebody looks at it, makes suggestions, corrections, and changes, and then a final draft is prepared, applying all of the changes that are suggested. And there are multiple ways to do a final draft. You could either do it in the form of a letter, you could do it in the form of a memo, or a manuscript, which is just a completed copy of the entire document. Okay, and so the method used, of course, depends on the length and the formality of the document. So think of a company that writes plays. Their final draft probably shouldn't be a letter. Their final draft should be the final completed, fully edited copy of the actual play. Versus somebody else may say, okay, I'm just gonna give a letter and say, okay, make these changes, and then I agree with the document, the draft is final, that type of thing. So these are some things to remember as you're working with keyboarded business documents. There are some other keyboarded documents that need to be briefly discussed. We don't go into too much detail about them, but they're important to know. And so there are things like reports. Well, we talked about reports. There are things like financial statements, which are normally documented through a computer, meeting announcements, minutes, agendas, and itinerary. We cover minutes, agendas, itinerary, meeting announcements, and other categories. So now we're going to briefly cover financial statements, because they're important as it relates to keyboarded documents as well, because they are one of the main documents prepared in just about every business. And so financial statements, what they do is they summarize accounting information like your sales, purchases, profit, and loss, letting the owners know how the business is doing. And so there are two main financial statements, your balance sheet and your profit and loss statement. And so the format guide given is that you use 1 inches all around, meaning top, bottom, left, and right is 1 inches of margin space. Each of the financial statements should have a heading, and they should be centered in the page. And so you would center all headings, including the company name, the name of the statement, so whether it's a balance sheet or the profit and loss, and the dates related to those statements, because both statements are prepared on a particular period of time or for a particular period. And so that's a key format to know. When we talk about the format as well, what we normally do is we use a line under the last number to indicate a total. And I'll show you what I actually mean by that. We use double lines under the final column total, and then we use dollar signs as well throughout, at the top and at the bottom, to signify the beginning and the end of calculations that we've done. So let's take a look at a sample income statement or profit and loss, which is going to show the company's profit or loss, or what we call net income. This tells me if the company is making money like they want to, because if you recall, companies are in business to make a profit. And so the income statement or profit and loss shows us this. And so as it says, what we see in the top and the center is going to be the name of the company, the name of the statement itself, and the period of time it covers. So income statement for year ended September 28th, 2019. And in thousands, just is telling me that this is rounded to the thousands place. So we need to add 3 more zeros to get the real figures. So this is a really big sales making company. All right. And so in your income statement, normally it shows things like net sales, cost of sales, gross profit. It's showing us what the value is of what was sold by the company, and then it's showing us all of our expenses. When we take our revenue or sales, every time we sell a product, we record it as sales. And then every time we spend money on something or we receive an invoice to pay a bill, that's an expense. And so the income statement just shows our sales minus our expenses. And so once that's a positive number, that means we're making a profit or we're making income. If it's a negative number, that means we have more bills than we have made sales, which is not where a company normally wants to be. And so when we look at the statement itself, as you can see, we use the number sign at the very top and at the very bottom only. Whenever we're using a total, we use this line to indicate, hey, there's a total happening here. So this line tells me that we did something here from this number to get to this number. And so, of course, we had to subtract to get to something like this. This line here is telling me that, hey, these two are added together to get this $854,000. Operating income came as a result of gross profit minus operating expenses to get that, and so on and so forth. So whenever you see those lines, that means that we're using something above is being used to calculate the number right below the line, okay? And like it says, whenever we see at the bottom underneath net income, we see the dollar sign, and then we also see this double underline. That double underline means that my statement is finished and I have no more calculations to do. And so that is a proper format of an income statement as well. That's how it should look. Here we have a balance sheet, which just shows the condition of the company at a certain date. And so again, we have the name of the company in the center. We have balance sheet in the center. And we have the period of time in which the balance sheet is for. Sometimes it can be on a third line, but it's still at the center. And so what the balance sheet is going to show me are the main categories like assets, liabilities, and owner's equity. Assets are goods and things that are owned by the company used to make money. And that includes things like cash, equipment, furniture. When we add them up together, see the line again? We add it up together to get this 11,000. And my assets are by itself. It's fine. It's a double underline. It's perfect. It's done. We have your liabilities now, which are things that are owed to other persons. So accounts payable, there's only one of them here, but I still have an underline showing that my total liabilities is $1,000. And then equity, same concept, paid in capital. This represents the owner's share. So because this has equity paid in capital, that's telling me that most likely this is a partnership or some type of corporation that we're tracking how much money the owners put into the business and plus any profits they got back from the business, etc. And so in a balance sheet, once you add the two of them together, you're going to come back. You should come back to your total assets, because in business, assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity. So liabilities plus equity must always come back to your total assets. And because I have the double underline underneath, that tells me that my balance is good. I'm satisfied and I have indeed balanced. This information normally comes from the trial balance that's used. It's called a trial balance. And it's just going to list all of these accounts here: cash, equipment, furniture, accounts payable, paid in capital, just to let the accountant know that these are the balances in those accounts. And the accountant normally takes that trial balance, which looks kind of like a table of contents, I guess, for accounts. And they take that information and they categorize them based on the assets, liabilities, and equity, put them together, total them up, and make sure that they're in balance. And that's kind of how it works with these particular statements. Next, we have our legal documents. And so these legal documents can be used in business as well. Depending on the type of business and what goes on in business, you need to have some legal documents drawn up. maybe for a mortgage, to record a purchase of a big item, to record payment of a legal expense or a court case, something like that, normally has to be documented in a legal document. And so legal documents tend to look like this. This one is from the US, but they look very similar. They have a certain size page, and then they normally have these lines at the side to let you know which line you're writing on. And they specifically say things like the United States of America or the Bahamas government, this one versus that person. And so they give a lot of information. They have document numbers and all these other things. They're very particular. They're normally signed on every page, and that's because legal documents have to be able to hold up in court, and it has to be clear that two persons agree to something. So normally they sign off on every single page. And so some of the guidelines given when correcting legal documents, what if you want to do one of three things, because these are very particular documents, if you type something and something is incorrect and you're going to correct it, either you're going to do a separate sheet of paper and you're going to list all of the corrections on the sheet and attach it to the original document, or you're going to X out the errors and key the information immediately following it. So put an X or a line through it and write the information right after it. Normally it's typed with a typewriter or something like that, not handwritten, or you're going to use correction tape or white out and cover the information and keyboard the corrections over it. This is considered to be a backing sheet, which is normally the back part of a legal document, usually signed and stamped by certain people. And so all of this is something that is pretty important to business itself. Finally, we're going to talk about some business abbreviations that you should be familiar with. These are some common ones that we found you have to be familiar with, or you should be familiar with. ASST, assistant. A-C is always account. Which one is also common? CAO, Chief Accounting Officer. CEO, Chief Executive Officer. CFO, Chief Financial Officer. Corp, usually stands for corporation. DEPT, usually stands for department. DIR, director. FIFO, first in, first out. HR, human resources. FYI, for your information. We have HQ for headquarters. Inc., Incorporated. LLC, limited liability company. LTD, limited company. Let's see. P&L, profit and loss. VAT, value added tax, and so on and so forth. A number of them are also included in your textbook, so just be familiar with the common ones. Common ones being CEO, CFO, CAO, department, human resources, HR, account, assistant, etc. Just be familiar with as much as you can, look through it and try to memorize the ones that are in your textbook. All right, and so that's the end of keyboarded information, keyboarded business documents. They're important because they are necessary in business. Persons have to do reports and legal documents and financial reports all the time. And so therefore you want to make sure that you follow a specific format that's given to make sure that the document is easily recognizable by anybody looking at another document. And so I hope this is helpful. I thank you for your time. You know how to contact me. Happy studying. Hi, Brenda here. I just want to take the time to say thank you for choosing this course. Thank you for choosing yourself and for preparing as you should for Office Procedures BGCSE. Look forward to more from me and Business Teacher Powell, and I look forward to seeing you in other classes. Bye.